Hello YouTube. Today I'm going to be doing about a half-hour video. I'm going to apologize for its length on sims versus games. What makes a flight simulator a simulator a simulator. And this is in particular in reference to Star Citizen claiming to be the best damn space sim ever. And what does that mean to me as a simmer? And the example I'm going to call or pull from is going to be FalconBMS. We're going to go through an entire mission at the start of a campaign, just a generic campaign. And the first thing you're going to notice is I'm going through all my flight controls. I had a crash right before this, and sometimes it likes to forget that I like to use a throttle instead of the keyboard, and reverses the axes on my toe brakes for some reason. It is what it is. Falcon has been around since 1998 is when the core of this was built. It essentially then been taken over by the community and modded, and from about 98 until 2010 it was the definitive jet combat simulator. It is still very highly regarded. It is about 80% accurate, and I still prefer it over DCS, which has eclipsed it in terms of realism, in particular with the A10C. The thing with DCS, it depends on what cockpit or cockpits you're flying in. A10C is about 90 to 95% accurate. FalconBMS is somewhere between 80-85%. But if you fly the DCS F-15C cockpit, it's only about 70% accurate. The same thing with Flaming Cliffs 3. Now, I do expect Star Citizen to be more along the lines of a Flaming Cliffs or an F-15C in terms of realistic fidelity versus gaming and that whole balance. But that still means having to know 200 to 250 keybinds. To give you an idea, I have 134 functions programmed to my HOTAS, to my CH HOTAS, and another 48 on the Cougar multifunction displays, but those replicate what you actually see in the cockpit, so I can use that to manipulate the various menus and things like that. And then I have about another 20 to 30 commands that I have to go to the keyboard, or I actually have to click on the physical switch in the cockpit. And we're going to see the level of detail that this cockpit is modeled to. And the A10 is even more detailed. The F-15C is less detailed. But nonetheless, somebody noted that in my Gladiator introduction video that I kind of sounded depressed when I was in the cockpit. And the reason being is when CIG wants to make the claim that they're trying to build the best damn space sim ever, I'm not exactly expecting 100% Newtonian flight-modeled physics to complete realism to the real world. If I wanted to do that, I would play Orbiter, which is one of those type of games. But I'm expecting a little level of detail similar to this, and this is, I'm having to set up a data cartridge. In fact, what you don't see here is the 5 hours I spent the night before trying to figure out why I couldn't communicate with the tower as well as setting up all my controls and stuff. And turns out, unlike in Falcon 4 Allied Force or previous iterations, you have to load this data cartridge with your radio frequencies set to your tower and how you want them to be mapped before you even load into game. And then you have to load that data cartridge and things like that when you get on the runway. So this is a standard bar cap mission that's a barrier combat air patrol. Basically fly to the sector of airspace, patrol back and forth, and shoot down any enemy aircraft that come close. If they need a quick intercept, you're going to be the people the AWACS call. And as we go through this video, I'm going to be pointing out, since I'm doing this after the fact, the multitude of mistakes I made. Because, again, I've not really actively played any of the... We're going to get a scramble here, so this is going to change the mission from a bar cap to a strict intercept. We've got a pair of hostile aircraft. I'm going to try to mouse over. I guess I'm just going to go ahead and go. But we have a pair of hostile aircraft possibly coming in to attack our airbase. So this is going to be a highly expedited and incorrect don't do this if you're trying to play FalconBMS realistically. So we're going to go through jet start. Turn on the power, the fuel, engine 2. This will basically get the engine rolling. You'd have a cart that would help start the engine, jump start the engine basically. We're going to start turning on the avionics, even though the jet doesn't have its own power yet. Turn on the heads-up display settings. I'm going to go ahead and set some interior lights here. Interior floodlights as well as backlights on the controls. Waiting for my engine to reach 2,500 RPM so we can then do main engine start. Detent the throttle, start the main engine, turn on the parking brake. Double check and visually check to make sure that the RPM is going up. Make sure that the auxiliary comm paddle is set so I can use both the Victor and UHF radios, uniform radios. Turn on my anti-collision lights. Alright, the cockpit's come to life. We're generating electricity now. Sending up the volumes for my comms 1, comms 2, uniform, and Victor radios. My missile growl, RWR receiver, comms panel, electronic countermeasures. Turn on my RWR, my radar warning receiver. And then try to get the cockpit to come down. This key, or button in the cockpit can be relatively difficult to hit with track IR. Normally I'll hit the keyboard hotkey to do this. Enable chaff and flare. Set to program 3 and manual control. Make sure I'm in Cat 1 since it's an air-to-air mission. That's kind of like IFCF. It'll limit your aircraft if you're in Cat 3. That's for ground attack mode. That means you have external stores, heavy load on the wings, and it will only allow you to pull 4.5, 5 Gs, where Cat 1 will allow you to do a full 9 Gs. I loaded my data cartridge, armed my cockpit, and turned on my air conditioning. Set nose wheel steering is what I'm looking down at the keyboard to do right now. I'm removing chocks. Requesting permission to taxi. Although the tower has probably been already complaining to me for a couple of hours. Turn on nose wheel steering. Turn off the parking brake. We're ready to go. But anyway, back to the Cat 1 versus Cat 3. If you pull more than about 5 Gs with bombs on the wings will fall off. Rip off. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my HUD. Now, things I've forgotten to do here. I forgot to turn on my taxi light, my floodlight in front of the aircraft. You know, that's kind of a ground school 101 mistake. Also, I'm doing a very poor job of taxiing here because I've, again, not done a ramp start in over a year in any Falcon game, so not exactly used to all the controls and that stuff. I'm going to go ahead and set my INS to navigation, and it did not have enough time to calibrate. This is really the biggest difference between me doing an intercept start and a full ramp start. The INS, it only takes about 3 minutes to get through all of the buttons you got to press and switches you got to click in this cockpit. INS takes 8 to 10 minutes to align and come online to where you can then load your flight plan. The radar is currently in its startup routine. It's going through a bit test. It takes 180 seconds. There's no way to expedite that. So I'm going to take off blind completely. I'm not going to have bearing, compass, and navigation markers in my HUD. I'm not even going to have radar as I get off the ground. I'm going to rely on AWACS calls. And then I realize I made another mistake. In the screen, in the loading screen, the mission selection screen, and the map, I forgot to load the bullseye overlay. A bullseye is a common reference point for all aircraft operating in the theater. It'll change after a couple of days. It could be over Pyongyang, could be over Seoul, could be somewhere over the float line. But anytime they make a radio intercept call to say a hostile aircraft is at bearing 170, 80 miles, it is 170 degrees, basically southwest of that bullseye point at 100 or at 80 miles. It could be directly west of me and 15 miles away, and based on wherever my position is. It's not based off of my location, it's based off that reference point. Well, since I didn't see where that reference point is, I have no idea where the hell that is. And I really didn't realize it until I was up there and I heard the call and went, crap. Now, I do have my bullseye location, or my position relative to that, and it's on the HUD as well as in the radar display, which is now enabled and turned on. I've got to select the right mode, but the radar is ready to go. However, what I can do is if I know they're bearing 180 and so many miles, I can kind of fly around until my numbers are heading in that right direction, and I generally know I'm heading in the right path, the right way. But then I'm going to have to rely on my radar. Now, fortunately for me, my wingman gets airborne, and the AI happens to see these targets, as they have magic omnipotent ability in these games, and then will start directing me in with relative visual cues. Basically, the target is at 2 o'clock high, or 3 o'clock low. Now, unfortunately, you get into this relativistic problem of your wingman might say the target is 12 o'clock low, but that's his 12 o'clock not necessarily your 12 o'clock. And if you guys are perpendicular to each other, well, you can start to see where the confusion becomes.
200, 100 miles,
So
13,000.
I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the in-depth modeling of the cockpit and why in my video on the Gladiator, somebody noted, well, I kind of sound depressed about the cockpit and the Gladiator. And the reason behind that is, I don't know, I'm kind of looking for a cockpit that maybe isn't to the exact fidelity here, but it just seems like to me there should be more functional switches and buttons. I know there are going to be multifunction displays in there, and you can do a lot with multifunction displays, but in an aircraft or a spaceship, there are just certain things that should be switches and flip toggles and things like that. Starting with something that I forget to do here, coming up, I'll point this out, and that is to fence in and turn your master arm on. Because I have a feeling that you should, you know, be cold, and if you go master arm on and they detect it and all of those things, you know, you can't land unless your weapons are essentially cold and things of that nature at certain starports and bases. When you're wanting to be creating the best damn space sim ever, you don't need to have a 15-minute ramp start. You don't need to have 500 switches there, but you need to have something. And where I really look for Star Citizen to hopefully shine is when it comes to operating the sensor mechanics. Because this is where I really like flight sims versus space sims. In a game like Elite Dangerous and Star Citizen as it is developed right now, you basically have a 360 by 360 bubble that you can see out to so far. In Star Citizen, I don't know what that range is. You know, you can see people 8-10 kilometers away. In Elite Dangerous, your sensors are limited to 4, 5, 6 kilometers, depending on what kind of sensors you have, what grade. But you can see track targets moving out in the background a lot farther than that with your Mark 1 eyeball, due to the fidelity of the game. It's actually very difficult for me to see these targets out at a distance. It's more accurately modeled, I think. It's kind of difficult to see targets at 8, 10, 12, 20 miles, especially moving against a background at night. People who play Falcon extensively can see this. They can pick up on targets. Oh, there's a pair of MiG-23s down there, and it's just like, what? I can't even... How do you even see that? But again, they're used to it. They know what they're looking for, and they can see it. But right now I'm in a turn. I'm trying to figure out where it is, and I notice my anti-collision lights are on. You don't want to make it any easier for your enemies to spot you. And now I'm into a dive into the ocean here, and this is actually a real-life major problem for pilots. I forget what it's called. There's a term for it, but this is what killed John F. Kennedy Jr. Is he was flying his plane, and doing so at night, it's very, very easy to get confused, especially if you're over water, which way is up. Up becomes down, down becomes up. You essentially suffer from vertigo, and you got to trust your instruments, and he was not instrument rated. But this is something that if you're flying at night, it can very easily happen to you, and that's why you have to learn how to trust your instruments. In fact, when you go for an instrument flight rating, they will basically put blackout curtains into the cockpit of the Cessna or Beechcraft, whatever you're flying. And you have to fly entirely on instruments, take off, land, the whole 9 yards, with a flight instructor with you in order to get your instrument flight rating. I never went that far, and flight for me got cost prohibitive about 8 years ago. Although I think you can rent a Cessna 172 for about $170 an hour wet around here. But, you know, for a 2 or 3 hour flight, that's several $100s. It just got to be too expensive. So I think I need to go get a new medical certificate. Interestingly enough, my family doctor left, joined the Air Force, was a flight surgeon, and now is back into private practice, although he's not on my new insurance plan since we got married. So, but at any rate, yeah, I didn't buy in. I had a chance to buy into fractional ownership of a plane, but didn't. Although I did see a MiG-21 the other day available for about $70,000. Tried to convince my wife to let me buy it, but she said no. Then tried for the F4 ejection seat. There's a disarmed Martin Baker ejection seat you can buy from the Boeing store for about $15,000. She said no to that too. Something about house needing siding and, you know, going to need a new car in the next couple of years, and kids, why I can't have nice things. At any rate here, I'm trying to find my targets, and my wingman is giving me kind of helpful cues, and I'm not seeing him at all. And I'm going through using my radar. And this is kind of important, because there's a lot of different radar modes in FalconBMS. For air attack, there's RWS, which is, I believe, range while scan, that detects individual targets. There is TWS, which is the most useful mode. It's target while scan, and that will soft lock up to 10 targets. And I should be able to just press TMS up, and it will lock up the next target, which is important here since I'm engaging a 2-ship. But I'm trying to find this target, and I'm maneuvering my radar left and right, because the radar operates like a searchlight. Again, we get back to this 360 by 360 bubble, which you will see in most space sims, where in an air combat game like this that's accurately modeled, it operates like a searchlight. And to scan over to the left, you got to tilt the radar dish over to the left. You can change its elevation up and down as well, so you can scan higher or lower. There's different scan modes. There's a 4-way or a 4-bar that'll search high to low in like a snake-like pattern. Once you kind of know where your target is, you can maybe do that to a 1 or 2 band in order to update quicker. Then you have ground attack radar modes with GM, which will hit or target buildings, moving targets, whatever. GMT, which is only moving targets, so if you need to target a ground target mode. And I finally find the target here and lock it up. And now I'm going, yeah, I've got 2 medium range missiles, so 2 AMRAAM selected. Why am I not getting a firing solution? And this is where I realized, I got to turn on Master Arm. Turning on your Master Arm switch helps if your weapons are actually primed and ready to fire. Now, if I had been using something like a Maverick missile, I would have to go Master Arm on, then turn on the missile and wait 2 or 3 minutes for the warhead electronics to warm up. In this game, just like it is in real life. It's not, let's say, like Arena Commander, where you can just lock onto the target and then fire. But I'm hoping for this level of depth when it comes to emissions gameplay and sensor gameplay. I hope that we don't have the omnipotent, you can see in a 360 by 360 degree view, unless you're flying with, say, a tracker module or maybe a larger command ship like a Constellation or maybe even a Freelancer. But certainly a Constellation, something that's going to have a bigger radar or maybe different radar selections or sensors, whatever you want to call it. Well, get Master Arm on, I get a good range, so I'm going to Fox 3 medium. It's going to go Pitbull, meaning it's switched over from my aircraft's radar to its internal radar for the final kill solution. And he's well within range. Fox 2 medium, he can't outmaneuver. And this is also set to cadet rating, so I doubt he's even going to try. I'm intercepting a pair of J5s, which should be MiG-17s, but I looked on the screen. I don't think we see the screen on here, but afterwards it pulls up and says MiG-19s, which should technically be the J6. They're both the Chinese-built version of the MiG-17, MiG-19, which are 1950 era original Korea War era planes. They don't really stand much of a chance here. But now I'm going to maneuver in close. I took out the trailer. Now I'm going to target the lead, but I can't get position, and then I'm going to commit a horrible mistake that should get me killed, but fortunately it's cadet settings. I couldn't get tone. I'd go ahead and launch an AMRAAM, or a Sidewinder heat-seeking missile anyway, just in hopes that it was close enough that the AIM-9X could lock in. It is an off-bore sight missile, an all-aspect ratio missile, so you don't have to necessarily be absolutely behind it like earlier versions of the Sidewinder. And I do have my bore sight targeting turned on. This is a Block 52 F-16. If it was a Block 40, that wouldn't work, because it doesn't have that helmet-mounted display, look-down, shoot-down capability. And what happened was I overshot the target, and then I pulled right in front of his guns. I mean, if it had been a higher AI settings, I probably would have been shredded. MiG-19 may not be very capable against a modern plane like an F-16, but if you allow it to get in close for dogfighting, it will shred you. They do still have very effective guns. So I'm going to circle around, I see the target coming up here. Gonna lock it up. It is in range for a good shoot with the AMRAM, so I'm going to go ahead and fire off an AMRAM, wait for it to go pitbull. And as soon as it does, I'm going to switch to sidewinders in case I need to make a follow-up shot. Also about this time, I get the bingo fuel warning, meaning I'm getting low on fuel. This is going to be my last pass. I see a hit, he starts to go down. I think he's destroyed, but never be deceived by ruses. I'm going to go ahead and shoot a follow-up missile. Sometimes if a missile detonates close enough, maybe damages the target instead of destroys it, they could pull out, go to the deck, and then slip away and run away. And I don't want that to happen. Or worst case scenario is you think they're dead and you go on to the next target and then they fly up. I'm going to go ahead and switch to 4x speed here just to speed up this video so it's not a 40-minute video and it's closer to 30 minutes. I'm blind, as in since I don't have a flight plan loaded, it's very difficult to tell where I need to go for home plate. I do get vectors from the AWACS. I do still have my magnetic compass, so if they're telling me relative positions, vectors to targets and things like that, I get a general idea. But I knew that I flew out west, so I need to head toward the sunrise to fly in east to get back over land. And I'm looking down and I notice I have about 900 pounds of fuel left at about a 4,000 pounds of fuel per hour burn rate. I have roughly less than 15 minutes. I have somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes worth of fuel left. So at this point I decide, okay, where am I positioned relative to divert field, which should be closer, or could be closer. It's actually further away. And then I finally request vectors to tanker. And the tanker's 300 miles away. There's no way I'm going to get to the tanker in order to gas up as a last case scenario, or worst case scenario. Not only that, considering I really haven't flown much in the last year, I doubt I would be able to do an air-to-air refueling successfully. So I'm looking around for any air base, and unfortunately I don't have a map of Korea printed out. And one of the things that I kind of don't like about BMS compared to, say, Allied Force or previous versions that had a 2D cockpit was you would have a knee board that would have a map and things like that. I've not been able to figure out any way of getting an in-game map reference other than pulling up a reference map that's available through, I think, like Flight Check Sim or something on my iPad to give me a general idea. But at the same time, I would like to know radio frequencies and things like that because I don't know what airbase. I'm going to go ahead and slow this down from 4x to 2x. I see an airbase down here. I could have gotten mixed up on my vectors, and this could be a hostile. There's a hostile airbase across the bay. So hopefully these aren't MiG-23s taking off or MiG-29s taking off to shoot me down. That would be bad. Landing at an enemy airfield would also be bad. But I'm starting to go in for a landing, and then I realize, oh crap, there's traffic on the runway, and it's heading in the opposite direction as I am. So I'm going to go ahead and power up and try to come in from a different angle. I've already declared an emergency, so I'm not going to get yelled at for the tower for interrupting the flight traffic patterns. Additionally, as I look over here, I see an F-16 landing, so it is a friendly airbase. But if you don't land at the appropriate air bases and stuff like that, you'll kind of get deducted and can get court-martialed and stuff like that. But I declared an emergency because I've got less than 10 minutes of fuel left. I don't have time to orbit for spacing, essentially. I'm not sure if you're that low on fuel if you should technically be calling a emergency landing or not. Generally, I will only do it if I've gotten shot up with electronics or something during a ground attack mission or an air-to-air mission. And maybe I'm wiggling back and forth due to damage to flight control surfaces, things of that nature. Now, one of the things that struck me here, I'm back to 1x time as I do what has to be one of my worst landings ever. I am surprised I didn't crash because I'm coming in pretty hot and hard. But I touched down safely, and I went back and checked the settings. It's not like on easy landings or something like that, so I landed successfully. And this is something you got to watch out about in the F-16, is you cannot land an F-16 with a full tank of gas. If you have the full 4,500 pounds of fuel and try to land, the landing gear will collapse. And I need to look this up, because I cannot for the life of me remember what that minimum fuel state it is that you can safely land at. If it's 3,500 pounds, I want to say it's like as low as 2,000 pounds. that you have to be under 2,000 pounds of fuel in order to safely land the F-16. I need to go look this up. But interestingly enough, very early on, 15 years ago when I was playing this game, I was always crashing on landing, and I couldn't remember why. I didn't know why, and finally somebody told me. They're like, oh yeah, you can't land the F-16 with a full tank of gas. Because occasionally in the dynamic campaign, you'll get a mission that'll get scrubbed. You'll have a bar cap, you'll get in the air, and then all of a sudden it's like, return to base. Your mission's been scrubbed for whatever reasons. And you'll have to go burn off fuel for a while. If you're got a bunch of ground stores on, you've got to jettison your stores and then go burn off fuel for however long. So then you can turn around and safely land. It does happen in this game. So on the runway, 2 kills. Successful. I'm going to try to cut it off here at about 25 minutes as I follow an F-16 NPC here to the tarmac. Thank you very much for watching, but I thought that I would just kind of show what makes a sim, at least from my perspective here. So I think some folks who are subscribers to the channel can kind of get a better idea of what I compare at least Star Citizen against in terms of the flight sim world. Thank you very much, and see you next time.